Chapter 31. Holy Water. The temptations I've been telling you about were internal and private. Now I'd like to describe some of the more public ways the spirit of evil chose to torment me. It was impossible not to recognize his presence in these incidents. One day, when I was in the auditory, the spirit of evil appeared to me in a hideous form at my left side. Since he was speaking to me, I couldn't help but focus on his mouth, which was terrifying. A huge flame leapt from his body. It was very bright and cast no shadow. "Truly, you have freed yourself from my clutches," he roared, "but I will seize you with them again." I was very frightened. The minute I began to cross myself, he disappeared. But he immediately came back again. This happened twice. I didn't know what to do. Then I noticed a vial of holy water. I threw some in his direction, and he never returned. On another occasion, he tormented me for 5 or 6 hours with racking external physical pains and harrowing internal mental anguish. I didn't think I could bear it for a minute longer. The sisters who were with me had no idea how to help me, and I was totally incapable of helping myself. Normally, when I'm ill or in pain, I make it a practice to offer up my suffering to the Lord. If what I am going through might be of any service to His Majesty, I ask Him to give me the patience necessary for me to endure it until the end of the world. The agony was so severe that day that it was all I could do to maintain my resolve to give it to God. The Lord must have wanted me to recognize that the devil was causing this trouble, because suddenly there appeared an abominable, dark creature beside me. He was snarling, as if he was frustrated that he had lost what he had been trying so hard to win. When I saw him, all my fear drained away, and I laughed. But the sisters who had witnessed my suffering didn't understand what was going on. They couldn't figure out how to alleviate my pain, and they felt helpless. The spirit of evil made me thrash around and bang my head and limbs against the floor. I was powerless to stop it. The inner turmoil was even worse. I wanted to ask them for holy water, but I was afraid they would realize what was going on, and I didn't want to alarm them. In my experience, there is nothing more frightening to demons than holy water. It makes them run away and never come back. They flee from the cross too, but they return. Holy water must be incredibly potent. It has a powerfully refreshing quality that I could never adequately describe. I notice a singular consolation in my soul whenever I come into contact with holy water. It is an inner delight that thoroughly permeates my being. This is something that has happened to me not once, but many times. I have paid close attention to its effects. It's as if a person were very hot and thirsty, and someone handed him a cup of cold water. His entire being feels refreshed. Everything that is blessed is important, but I think there must be something especially sacred about the prayer that so vastly differentiates ordinary water from water that is blessed. That particular day, the torment just wouldn't let up. So finally, I said to the sisters, "If you wouldn't laugh at me, I'd ask you for some holy water." They brought the holy water and sprinkled it on me, but it didn't do any good. I threw some in the direction of the evil spirit, and he vanished. In that moment, all the sickness left me, as if someone had scooped it out of me by hand. The only lingering symptom was a pervasive ache, as if I had been severely beaten with a stick. It made me think about what the spirit of evil would do to a soul he managed to capture for his own. Look at how much harm he did to one who does not belong to him. It renewed my desire to distance myself from such negative forces. This happened to me one other time, not long ago. I was alone, but I cried out for help. 2 nuns rushed in with holy water. The evil spirit had already departed, but the sisters smelled a foul stench like sulfur in the room. I didn't smell anything, but these women are both very trustworthy, and they would never tell a lie. The odor lingered long enough that other people detected it too. Another day, I was in the choir when I felt a strong urge toward recollection. I left the choir so that the other sisters would not notice the state I was entering, but they all heard a loud crash in the place where I had just been kneeling. I heard the sound of nasty voices close to my ear, as if the evil spirits were plotting something, but I couldn't make out the words. By that time, I was so absorbed in prayer that I didn't perceive anything else, and I was completely unafraid. This kind of thing also happened every time the Lord granted me the favor of guiding some soul along the path that leads home to Him. I am about to tell you something that I can assure you really did happen. There were several witnesses. One of them is my current confessor. He saw it described in a letter and knew exactly to whom it pertained without my even telling him. A certain person came to me who had been engaged in grave spiritual error for 2.5 years. It was one of the most serious transgressions I have ever heard of. He had not confessed his sins or made amends during this entire time, yet he continued to say Mass. How could I confess something so ugly? He asked me. This priest had a deep desire to give up his sinful behavior, but he couldn't help himself. I felt deep compassion for him, and it caused me great sorrow to see how he was forsaking God in this way. I promised that I would beseech God with all my heart to help him, and that I would recruit some other people who are more spiritually evolved than I am to pray for him also. I sent letters to the priest through a certain person whom he trusted to deliver them. As it turns out, as soon as he read my first letter, he went to confession. I suppose having all those pious people praying for him had some effect. I am a miserable wretch, but I approached his problem with tremendous care. It seems that God wanted to grant this soul His mercy. The priest wrote to me that he was doing much better. "I haven't sinned for days," he said. Yet, temptation continued to torment him so severely that it sounded as if he were living in hell. He asked me to keep praying for him. I, in turn, asked my sisters to pray for him, and they took his situation deeply to heart. Still, nobody could guess the identity of the secret sinner. I implored His Majesty to take away his torment and send those demons to me instead, as long as they would not cause me to offend my God. It was during that month that I suffered from the severe afflictions and diabolical intrusions I just described. I wrote to tell him what I was going through during this time, and he wrote back to tell me that it was working. The evil spirits had left him. His soul was fortified, and he felt truly liberated. He could not thank me enough, although he had nothing for which to thank me, and he praised God with all his heart. Knowing that God had granted me spiritual favors seemed to inspire him. When he read my letters and saw what I had suffered so that he could be saved, it motivated him to change for good. I was amazed myself. I would gladly have endured years of pain if it meant that this beautiful soul would be set free. May the Lord be praised for everything. The prayers of souls who serve Him, like the sisters who live in this house, are powerful. I supposed it enraged the spirits of evil to see me seek these prayers, and they made me pay for it. I'm sure my own wickedness had something to do with my torment as well. Another strange thing happened during this period. One night I woke up and couldn't breathe. I thought they were choking me. The sisters came and sprinkled a lot of holy water all around my cell. Suddenly I saw a large crowd of evil spirits rushing past, as if they were on their way to throw themselves off a cliff. There are many times when these demons still try to torment me, but I am no longer afraid. I know that they have no power except what God allows them to have. It would bore you to hear about the many little ways they have beleaguered me. I would bore myself to recount them. I pray that what I have written so far is of some help to the true servants of God. Pay no attention to the scarecrows the spirit of evil sets up to frighten us. Remember, every time we ignore them, they grow weaker and we gain more mastery. We always benefit in some way from these encounters. I won't elaborate on that now or I'd be off on another long tangent. I'll just tell you about one thing that happened to me on the night of All Souls. I was in the oratory and had just finished reciting a nocturne. I was starting to repeat the deeply devotional prayers that come next in our prayer book. Suddenly, a demon swooped down and actually landed on my book so that I couldn't finish reading the prayer. I crossed myself, and he went away. But the minute I began praying again, he came back. I think this happened 3 more times. It wasn't until I threw holy water at him that I was finally able to complete my prayer. At that moment, I saw several souls emerge from purgatory. Their period of purification must have been almost up, and the spirit of evil had been trying to prevent their release. I have not seen the devil in physical form many times, but I have often perceived his presence. I want to tell you about another thing that really frightened me. One day, on the Feast of the Holy Trinity, I was sitting in the choir of another monastery and had slipped into rapture. In this heightened state, I witnessed a great battle between angels and devils. I did not understand what the vision meant at the time, but less than 2 weeks later, a bitter conflict erupted between some sisters who were deeply devoted to the practice of prayer and some who were not at all prayerful. Suddenly, that vision made sense. This dispute caused a great deal of harm in the house. It lasted for a very long time and shook everyone up. There were other times when I saw a crowd of evil spirits gathered around me, but I was enveloped in light and they could not touch me. I could tell that God was watching over me and keeping them away so that they could not make me forsake Him. Knowing who I am, this was a real danger. Since then, I have come to understand that as long as I do not set myself up against God, the spirit of evil has almost no power, and I have very little to fear. Unless they encounter cowardly souls who give in to them, demons have no strength. Sometimes I suffered from such compelling temptations that it seemed as if all the vanities and weaknesses of my past were reawakening inside me. I had to pray hard to get through it. This experience made me question all over again whether the favors I had received from God actually came from the spirit of evil. It seemed to me that someone who had experienced the blessings I had experienced shouldn't have the tiniest twinge of a bad thought ever again. But my confessor set my mind at peace about this. Another thing that tormented me then and continues to torment me now is when people put me on a pedestal. It especially disturbs me when highly prominent people speak of me with great respect. I have suffered terribly from this kind of esteem. Look at the life of Christ. Look at the lives of the saints. Did they evolve through flattery? No. They attained their station by being subjected to contempt and insults. My life is the opposite of theirs. I'm like someone who does not dare raise her head for fear of being noticed. I feel better when I'm being persecuted. Then my soul walks with her head held high. My body may suffer and I may experience certain kinds of emotional pain, but my soul is master of herself. I don't really understand how this works, but that's how it is. At times like this, the soul seems to be ruler of her own kingdom. Everything rests beneath her feet. There is another temptation I have grappled with. Sometimes it lasts for many days. It tries to disguise itself as the virtue of humility, but a very learned Dominican friar clearly explained to me that it is a trap. Whenever I considered the possibility that the favors the Lord was granting me might become public knowledge, I suffered intensely. My soul became so disturbed. that I would have preferred to be buried alive than have people find out about my spiritual experiences. Since I was incapable of resisting recollection and rapture, even when they happened in front of other people, I would always emerge from one of these deep states feeling so ashamed that I was reluctant to go out where anyone might see me. Once, when I was especially worried about this, the Lord spoke to me. "What are you afraid of?" he asked. Only one of two things could come of it. People will either criticize you or praise me. He explained that people who believed in the experience would praise him, and those who didn't would condemn me. It wasn't my problem. Either way, the outcome would benefit me, so I shouldn't be anxious. This calmed me a great deal. I still feel comforted when I think about it. But at that time, the temptation reached such an intense degree that I wanted to pack up and move to a place where nobody knew me. I had heard about a convent that was far more cloistered than the one in which I was living. I had heard great things about that community. It belonged to my own order, and it was many miles from Avila. I would have felt much better being anonymous, but my confessor wouldn't let me leave. This fear seriously encumbered my freedom of spirit. I finally realized that it was not a sign of true humility. It caused too much anxiety. Besides, the Lord taught me this truth. His blessing is not some good thing reserved for me alone. It belongs to God. I must be absolutely certain of this. Am I sorry when I hear other people praised for their holiness? On the contrary, it gives me comfort and joy to see that God has revealed himself in them, and so I should never be troubled if he displays his works in me. Whenever a person seemed to see something good in me, I had a tendency toward another extreme. There was a special prayer I had composed for just such an occasion, in which I besieged His Majesty to reveal my sins to that person. That way, the person wouldn't mistakenly believe the favor I was receiving correlated with any merit on my part. It is very important to me that people understand how undeserving I am of God's abundant grace. My spiritual director advised against this special prayer, but until very recently I found it difficult to stop. I always seek roundabout ways to advertise my transgressions when it looks like someone is starting to think highly of me. Even though it gives me relief to do this, my confessor does not approve, and he has made me more circumspect about this behavior. It turns out that these feelings did not arise from humility, but were a subtle kind of temptation. I was obsessed with the notion that I was deceiving everyone. And while it is true that they were mistaken about my goodness, I certainly did not intentionally delude them. The Lord had his own reasons for making them think such things. I even tried to stop discussing the issue with my spiritual guides unless it really seemed necessary, because I recognized that I had a tendency to make too much of it. Now I understand how these guilty little fears that masquerade as humility come from a lack of spiritual development. A soul who has surrendered herself into God's hands doesn't care whether people say good things or bad things about her. God has given her the gift of understanding that nothing she has belongs to her alone. Let the soul trust in the one who has given her this gift, and she will discover why he has given it to her. Let her be ready for persecution, for in times like these, it is guaranteed that the minute people begin to hear that a certain person is being granted divine favors, the person will be condemned for it. There are 1,000 eyes fixed on such a person, while 1,000 other people go entirely unnoticed. There are perfectly valid reasons to be afraid, but my qualms stem from simple faint-heartedness. A soul whom God leads along an open path before the eyes of the whole world should be prepared to be martyred. If she does not willingly die to the world itself will surely kill her. There is nothing in this world that pleases me except its basic refusal to tolerate faults in good people. By criticizing them, it perfects them. I say that it is easier to suffer a quick martyrdom than to follow the way of perfection. Unless the Lord chooses to grant the special privilege of perfecting a soul all at once, perfecting generally comes very slowly and requires tremendous courage. When the world sees that someone has started out on that path, it demands that she be perfect right away. The world thinks that it detects a fault in someone from 1,000 miles away, when what it perceives might actually be a virtue. Maybe that same behavior is actually a vice in the person who condemns it, and he judges others the way he should be judged himself. Souls on the path to perfection are hardly allowed to eat or sleep or even breathe. The more highly they are esteemed, the more they are expected to forget they have a body. No matter how perfect a person's soul might be, or how successfully she may have trampled the world under her feet, she still lives on this earth and is subject to its miseries. Such a soul must be very brave. She has barely begun to walk, and they are trying to make her fly. She still hasn't conquered her passions, and they are insisting that she be unmoved in the face of great temptation. They have read how the saints behaved after having been confirmed in grace, and they expect this poor soul to act the same way. There is great cause to praise the Lord here, but there is equally ample reason to grieve. Many souls turn back at this point because they don't know how to help themselves. I believe my own soul would have turned back if the Lord himself, in his mercy, hadn't done everything for me. Before that, as you will see, all I could do was fall down and get up again and fall again. I wish I knew how to express this. I know I have used this comparison before, but I think it's worth repeating because I see so many souls suffering unnecessarily. They have been deluded into thinking they are supposed to fly before God has even given them wings. They start off with fervent desires and powerful determination to evolve in virtue. Some of these souls have severed all their worldly attachments. Then they notice other souls who have grown in perfection and engage in highly virtuous actions. They read all the books on prayer and contemplation and hear about the things we need to do to rise to that exalted state. And they become thoroughly dejected as a result. There is someone who seems to be happier when people speak badly about him than when they speak well of him. He doesn't care about his reputation. There's another who has distanced himself from all of his old relationships because the people are not interested in prayer and it wearies him to converse with anyone who isn't on a spiritual path. This troubled soul doesn't realize that God is the one who gives us these gifts. We cannot cultivate them independently. These virtues are supernatural. That is, they transcend our natural inclinations. Let these souls drop their anxiety. Let them trust in the Lord. Let them simply practice prayer and do the best they can. His Majesty will take their highest desires and turn them into action. Our nature is weak. It is very important to cultivate confidence and not lose heart. We should not give in to the doubt that our sincere efforts will lead to victory. Since I have so much experience in these matters, I'd like to offer a little advice. Don't think that you have gained virtue unless you have been tried by its corresponding vice. We must always be vigilant and never take our growth for granted as long as we live. We have not yet been given the grace to understand the true nature of everything. There are many dangers in this life, and it's easy to get attached to worldly things. A few years ago, I thought I had achieved the virtue of detachment from my relatives. Since many of them did not practice prayer, distancing myself from them was not difficult. The truth is, I could hardly stand to have a conversation with them. They bored me. Then a very important business matter came up, and I had to go stay with my younger sister Juana for a while. I had been very fond of her before, but now I didn't feel any rapport between us. even though she was a better person than I. She was married, and we had very little in common. We didn't talk about the things I would have liked to discuss, so I spent most of my time alone. I noticed, however, that listening to her marital troubles upset me and worried me far more than they would have if I had been hearing about the tribulations of a neighbor. I came to realize that I was not as free as I thought. I saw that if I wanted the seed of virtue the Lord had begun to give me to flower, I would have to avoid the opportunity to be attached. With His help, I have tried to do this ever since. When the Lord begins to instill a certain virtue in the soul, she should tend it well and never take the risk of losing it. This is especially true of attachment to what other people think. Do not assume that those of us who believe we are detached actually are. We have to be exceedingly careful about this. Anyone who wants to make progress on the path but is concerned about his reputation needs to listen to my advice. Strive to detach. Attachment is like a chain no file can cut. Only our sincere prayers and earnest efforts, combined with God's grace, can set us free. Attachments are like shackles on the spiritual path. I am astounded by the harm they can cause. I see certain people who impress everyone with the righteous and sacred acts they perform. God help me. Why are souls like that still on earth? Why haven't they reached the summit of perfection? What is this? What would be holding someone back who has done so much for God? I'll tell you. Attachment to what other people think. What's even worse is that these men have no idea they are attached. This is because the spirit of evil sometimes makes us think that we are entitled to receive honor. Let these men believe me. Let them, for the love of God, believe this little ant who has something to say. The Lord wants her to say it. If you do not pick off the caterpillar of attachment, it probably won't destroy the whole tree because other virtues will compensate for it. But the tree will be worm-eaten. It will not flourish. It will not be beautiful. It won't even allow the trees around it to thrive. The fruits of good example they offer to others will not be healthy and will quickly wither. I often say that no matter how small a point of honor may be, it is not worth fighting for. Concern about what other people think is like striking the wrong chord on the organ or playing a song when the timing is off. The music is dissonant and ugly. This attachment to reputation is a problem in any context, but it is especially toxic on the path to perfection. We are striving for union with God. We are seeking to follow His teachings, which have come through Christ, who was falsely accused and burdened by His wounds. And we also want our honor and reputation to remain intact. These two desires are mutually exclusive. If we take different roads, how can we expect to meet God? The Lord comes to the soul when she has made a voluntary effort to surrender her rights in every possible arena. But I don't have any opportunities to practice detachment from my rights, you might say. Or I have nothing to give up. Remember, the Lord wants you to attain the highest good. If you are determined to break your attachments, I do not believe He will stand in your way. His Majesty will arrange so many occasions for you to practice detachment that you may wish you had never asked. All hands to the task. I like to mention some of the little nothings I used to care about when I first embarked on the path. Among my many other faults, I neglected to learn all the prayers in my prayer book or the various duties we were expected to perform in the choir. I was too busy engaging in vanities and trivialities. But there were other novices who were capable of teaching me these things. Did I ask for help? No. I was afraid they would discover how little I knew. Plus, I didn't want to set a bad example. What a cheap excuse. Soon enough, God opened my eyes a little. Then, even when I actually did know what I was doing, I would ask the youngest girls for guidance. I didn't lose any honor or credit by doing this. In fact, the Lord seemed to give me a better memory from then on. I didn't know how to sing very well either. Whenever they entrusted me to lead a song and I failed to practice adequately, I panicked. It wasn't that I was afraid of making a mistake in front of the Lord. That would have been a virtuous qualm. I was concerned about the opinions of the people who were listening to me. And so, for purely egotistical reasons, I became so agitated that I ended up doing far worse than I should have. Later, when I was unsure of my part, I took it upon myself to ask someone. This was very painful for me at first, but eventually I came to enjoy it. It turned out that the less I came to care about what people thought of what I knew, the better I sang. Whereas the more I tried to protect my miserable honor, the more I failed in performing what I considered to be a true honor. Honor. That word means different things to different people. With the combined energy of all these little nothings, which really do amount to nothing, and the utter nothing that I am, since such nothings bothered me so much, my efforts began to pay off. His Majesty values every little thing we do for him. Then he helps us do bigger things. So I was thinking about the problem of humility. I could see that everyone in the house was making progress in this area except me. I had always been good for nothing. It occurred to me to gather up all the sisters' mantles after they had left the choir. This made me feel like I was serving the angels who were praising God there. This went on for quite some time. Then somehow, and I will never know how, they found out what I was up to. This embarrassed me terribly. Not because I had grown so virtuous that I was willing for people to know my secrets, nor was it a matter of humility. Rather, I was afraid they would laugh at me because the things I was doing were so trivial. Oh, my Lord, I am ashamed of so much wickedness. Here I am, reporting on some grains of sand I still couldn't lift from the riverbed to serve you. Everything I did came wrapped in 1,000 miseries. The water of your grace was not yet flowing beneath my sands to raise them up. Oh, my Creator, amidst so many evils, who could find anything worthy to talk about? What do I have to offer compared to the great favors you have given me? But so it is, my beloved Lord, and I don't think my heart can bear it. I don't know how anyone reading this can fail to hate me. Look how poorly I have repaid such wondrous blessings. And in the end, I shamelessly claim the services I have offered you as my own. Yes, I am ashamed, my Lord, I really am. But since I have so little to say for myself, I elaborate on my lowly beginnings. My hope is that anyone who actually does great things right from the start will take heart from my poor example. It is clear the Lord took my meager efforts into account. Surely he will value theirs all the more. May it please His Majesty that I not get stuck at the beginning forever. Amen.